And welcome back, everybody, to the Game Dev Show. We are live with Greg and Andrew, and I think Story might be joining us later today, too. So welcome, everybody. How's it going, guys?
Doing great.
There are a couple things I wanted to talk about today. One is the new tool that Andrew built and released, which I think is pretty interesting. Should be a fun conversation. I also wanted to talk about last night, though. So last night, I've got my wristband to show here. I went to the Unity LA meetup. So it's a meetup that used to happen regularly in downtown Los Angeles up until I think 2020, when it obviously died off for somewhat pretty obvious reasons, I'm sure. And it restarted again last night. I went out there with Dave, who I think is probably too tired to make it. He might have also had other things to do. I don't know. But he was out there, and a couple other people. Corvallis was supposed to make it and didn't, so I've got to give him shit for that. But it was fun. It was interesting, and it reminded me of one thing that I think is super important for everybody who's like looking for a game dev job. And it's that going to these meetups is by far the best place to find a job. When I was there, I think there were only about 12 people that came, but I think 4 of them said that their companies were hiring and they were there kind of looking to see if they could recruit Unity developers. So it was like 25%. It's usually not that high of a percentage, but I've never been to a meetup where there aren't people recruiting and trying to hire developers there. So if you're looking for a job in game development stuff or looking for a new job, I highly recommend you go to these things, go to them regularly, meet people, start talking to people. And even if you're not, you can go learn and pick up new skills and make new connections and stuff. And then in the future, when you are looking for a job, you know people that you can just reach out to. So I don't know, have you guys been to any meetups lately? I know it's been weird, so it probably hasn't happened yet, but I'm curious if it's kicked off.
Yeah, I went to one at NC State. Unity, the guy was there. He's no longer with Unity. He went back with, I think it was Bethesda or some other company he had been with previously. But it was all about the new multi-user, the new gaming services.
Okay, the Unity gaming services stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, was that pretty packed? How many people were there?
There was probably 30 or 40 people there. And there was a corresponding Discord group. It's a Triangle Unity users group for, Research Triangle Park area, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill. So I'm still on that group, but there's not very much activity on it.
Lems live in an area that has very few Unity developers, that has more than a few Unity developers, but there's no local organization. There used to be one, but it closed. And that's this LA meetup it's interesting because it's actually being run by a guy who moved to Los Angeles in 2021. So he moved there after the meetup had already shut down, started another meetup, and then found out that one existed and was able to kind of take it over. And I feel like that's it's definitely an opportunity that's available now. Right now, there's a lot of places that could probably use an organization or a meetup like that, and they're really easy to set up and start as long as you can find a place to do it. All you gotta do is figure out a place that you can actually do that. And what I would recommend for that, if you're trying to find one, is look at some of the other local software meetups if you can. See if there's JavaScript meetups and TypeScript ones and C# and C++ meetups, all those types of things, and see where they're doing them, and then reach out to their organizers and ask them if they have recommendations for places in the area, because they're probably going to know places that do like to do that stuff and places that don't, and they may just have a recommendation to somewhere that would make it very easy. So I've even considered doing it here. I just worry that I don't know if I'll be reliable enough to show up every month. So I don't want to be the host and then and be like, yeah, I can't make it this month. So I think it would be interesting though. So I'm going to try to go as much as possible. Hey, everybody in chat go to these meetups? Go ahead. What's up, Bender?
Well, I've recently learned that the San Francisco meetup is back on. Years ago, before the pandemic, I think, or around then, it disbanded or something. It just stopped happening. It became more infrequent, and then all of a sudden just stopped happening. And I've recently heard that maybe it's back, so I plan on going to those. I think there's a Unity Dev Day in San Francisco as well in December that I plan on. It's on my calendar. So that should be,
nice.
yeah. So if you're in the San Francisco area or able to get there, Dev Days seem like a good idea.
Oh yeah, I highly recommend that kind of stuff too. Just go into those networking events. It's fun. It's really chill, and you learn some stuff and meet a lot of people. So it's really cool. Andrew, you want to dive into the thing that you've been working on? Oh, hold on. Hello, Mr. Story.
Howdy.
All right. Had to bring Jason in real quick so he can tell us how terrible your thing is.
Yes, I want.
That's the plan. So, Jason, the plan now is to just tear apart what Andrew has done and tell him how bad it is. For everybody who doesn't know what it is, wants to check it out, it's this Northstar navigation and tracking system that is going to share right now and talk about. So, what is this thing you built, and why did you build it?
So I built it for my own game. I was working on Legend of the Stones here, and I said to myself, I need overlays. And then I thought, hey, I could make this a whole thing for other people. So basically, it's 4 things in one. It's the compass bar here in the top right. This can be a radar bars, or not compass bar. It's the compass or radar in the top right, so you can see the different things. You've got the overlays of the characters. You've got this blue icon, which is actually pointing to this tower. It seems like it's unlinked right now, though. I just re-imported the latest version. I need to relink that. Otherwise, that blue thing would be moving. You've got the screen overlay on these characters here, and you can see the little monster symbols and the star symbol on the well, and the navigation bar at the top, which is classic navigation bar. This I actually used this scene as for a video showing how you can override the value. So right now, whenever these flying eyes are looking at the player, they turn red. You can override everything here. Like, this is extremely customizable. I figure, I don't know about you, but for me, I want to customize the stuff that I get from the asset store as much as possible. So you can kind of see this bar here in the navigation. There's 3 different navigation bars that I'm just including with it. And when you could just change them out by doing this, but it's extremely easy to create your own as well. They're just images and some code, so you can create your own and or you can use these directly if you'd like. But it's very easy to change them out, very easy to create them and customize them, customize the icons, customize the size, and customize how they act. You can add you can override everything at runtime. So like just changing them to red is just 1 line of code. You can override individual icons. You can override all enemies of a certain type, whatever you want there. You can expand it. So the demo scene has a I can quickly show that too. Let me share my other window real quick. I've got multiple. How many Unity projects do you guys have at any given time?
Open or in the hub?
Yeah.
Open.
Usually like 3 to 5.
I stick with 2. I usually have about 8 in hub and 2 open at any given time. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, since I do tutorials, for my tutorials, I usually have my prototype open, and then the one I'm doing live or recording.
Yeah. So here we go. This is the demo scene that ships with it, and Story produces much better demos. I need to spend more time to produce demos that look like his demos. But there's a couple things here. We've got these wolves here, and so you can override. You can customize all the logic here. So I've added this health bar. So now you click on these, and there's a health bar that is part of the icon, but it's separate. And you can see as it comes to the edge, it can fade out and fade in. There's a nice transition between I don't know if you kind of see on the right edge there, you can see a transition between the two. And then the other feature that you can override these, berries, for the berries, when you get close to them, they show up. Then when you press spacebar, there's a progress bar. And like in many games, you can now collect the berries. When it gets to the top, you've collected the berries. So basically, you can do anything you want with this, which I think is kind of exciting because, when I play games like New World or something, that's what inspires me about this. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, wow, okay, I want mine to look like that. I want my title bar to come down and show where I'm at. Well, you can do that. So there's just anything you want to do, you can do. It comes ready to go with all that functionality you just saw. But if you want to make it your own and add new things, you could do conversations with NPCs. quests you could embed in that. You could do pretty much anything. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of something when I was doing that long drive back and forth to LA last night after I was done talking to you. I was thinking about one of the videos I wanted to do, which was about one of the things like why I like Unity. Not just like why I like Unity, but what makes Unity kind of special compared to some of the other engines. And one of those key things was the asset store, and just the fact that a lot of the core, like not core systems to games, but the side things that are important to have, but I really just don't want to make, are all available so cheaply, and a lot of cool different types of effects and systems. You know, I think of just thinking back to like slicing systems when I wanted to make a lightsaber game in VR. I didn't have to go figure out how to do all that. I spent like $15 and grabbed a slicing package, and it just worked, and I was able to get in. And I feel like there's a lot of these things in that asset store ecosystem, especially, that make it really easy. And for me, it's like one of the key, that C#, you know, multi-platform development and deployment and the asset store are kind of like the three things that make Unity special and unique for me.
Yeah, and I should add, if you don't mind sharing that, there you go. So from infinitypbr.com, I've got the scripting docs link up there, so it's easier to find. I have a lot of scripting on this page for the game modules, for my equipment system, for random other things, but also Northstar has extensive documentation now, quick starts, demos, videos, demos of the videos of the demo. I'm throwing up tips, coding tips here, and then all the documentation for all the different systems are here. So if you are someone, you're like, okay, that looks really cool, I want that for my game, which you probably do, because most games will have some level of overlays in them, and you think, oh shoot, that's going to be hard to learn. I get it. It's customizable, and the more customizable things are, the more difficult they are to understand and get your brain around. So I've added a ton of documentation. So definitely feel free to hit me up on Discord and ask questions, because you know, it's not just when you're putting stuff on the asset store, you can just throw it up, but you got to do the next step, in my opinion, which is producing the documentation, providing some level of support. For me, it's on Discord with the community, and I'm there too, just to make sure people are successful with the stuff they buy.
I will say, while you're right, your demo scenes are, let's politely just say, a bit rough. You do have some of the best documentation on the store. Like, legitimately, there's only like 3 or 4 asset developers where I look at the documentation and go, oh, they care. They're actually making documentation I can read. The rest of them are like, we've done what we need to pass the like conceptual bar of documentation. But your stuff genuinely does go above board in terms of like, there's actual demos of stuff and like gotchas, because I noticed that yourself. You will like do something, because again, people who don't know, Andrew will live stream developing these. You can like watch him do it, and what's really fun is like you'll hit something using your own asset, going, well, that wasn't very clear, and then you'll add it to the documentation, which is like the right way to do it, because you're like you're seeing it as a consumer. Well, a lot of documentation is just, I wrote this, here's the minimal steps to get it running. But like if someone hits any of the genuine normal issues of I added to project, didn't work, they're out of luck, right? There's no understanding for that. So
yeah. Well, good. So there you go.
Well, everybody should go check it out.
Yeah, it's half off right now with the new release discount too. So that's always nice.
By the way, when I was looking at that, I realized that there was the 30 for 30 mega bundle that's going on again. I totally missed that. So I don't know how much longer that's going on, but I'm going to check it out and see what's in there.
6 days, 5 days, but there's an Infinity PBR pack in there. The medieval town village environment is in there. So that building that you saw, the building in the well in the demo that I just showed, it was actually from that package. So and the tower in the side. So that's in the 30 for 30 mega bundle right now. It's $65 package. So, you know, get that.
Yeah, those mega bundles are almost always like worth getting. $30 you get $1 an asset. It's kind of slightly crazy, and there's always at least like 1 or 2 things in there that I've wanted and just didn't get yet. So yep, I see the fantasy medieval. I'm scrolling through and looking now. There's a lot of stuff, and just go check it out. I don't know, anybody interested, it looks pretty cool. I'm gonna grab it myself. Story, before you hopped on, we were talking briefly about meetups and user groups, and I was telling them all how I went to the LA meetup that just restarted last night, and a lot of people were hiring and recruiting, and I was surprised at like the percentage of people that were hiring and recruiting, just given the like last couple months what I've been seeing of people mostly looking for jobs and not very many people hiring and recruiting. So I was curious, have you been going to any like local events? Has that kind of restarted over in your area yet? It's just now seems to be over here. So.
Well, given that the only Unity developers in my area live in this office, by the looks of it, from every time I've tried to set things up, it seems very unlikely. Yeah. Like I've literally just programming in general. There's like two groups within 100 miles of me. There are two groups that do Java stuff, and that's it. So I mean, I'm sure if I started a group, I could probably wrangle a few other game devs out of the woodwork. But there's not really any groups or setups around here, unfortunately. But to your point about hiring, yeah, I have seen that a bit though. We've hired 2 new people recently on stuff. Granted, they're people who know people for very specific tasks of doing shader work or whatever. It's not sort of general work. But yeah, I mean, there is still hiring going on, you know. And to the meetup point, I was at the meetup that you set up that I'm still attending. I attended that on Thursday, so yeah.
Huh. Nice. Are people hiring at that thing still every now and then, or I know every now and then there would be somebody who had a position open they were looking to fill, but
not at the moment. But there are. I'm in a couple of Discords where I'm seeing that come up a bit, but yeah, I don't think hiring has gotten that popular yet. Like I know there is stuff coming up, but I think it comes down to when do people start projects, right? Like I think usually projects are started around January, right? And so people put the feelers out around now in preparation, but they don't really run the process until near the start of a year. So I've not really heard that much just yet.
All right, that's the worst time to get a job is December, like late November, December, nearly impossible because half the people are out. Nobody wants to make any decisions, and everybody's waiting until Christmas break is over. So yeah.
I got hired at my new job in December last year.
Oh, really?
Yep.
You're lucky.
But I had a former coworker that was there and referred me. So
that's also like that. I mean, and Story, you kind of mentioned that at the other, you just hired people that new people, and yeah, I feel like I always tell people like the best way to get a job is to just know somebody. By far, like if you happen to be the neighbor of the guy that's hiring, you've got a better chance than just a random person who's actually qualified. So like knowing people super important. That's why I think going to those meetups and those types of events helps a lot. It makes a big difference because you actually get to talk to people. Hey, there's a question. You guys want to answer a quick technical question from Jules? Sure. Is there a simple way to make an AI nav agent navigate up and down lifts in their routes around internal scenes?
You mean like elevators, lifts?
Yes.
For those of us.
Yeah, British lifts.
Yes.
Or Irish lifts.
Would that be? I don't know for sure, but would that be one of the off-mesh links? Would that?
I feel like that wouldn't be very smooth or work very well, though, right? Yeah. I feel like with this, you're going to have to do my default would be to make some sort of an elevator thing that they're walking to. The problem is I don't know how you shorten that. Maybe you do make an off-mesh link for the path navigation, but I think the actual movement part of it, once you got to the point where you would be making an off-mesh link.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking I would use the nav-mesh linking to move you onto a square of floor that represents the actual floor of the elevator. Then once you're on it, I would disable it, animate it up to the location, reactivate it, and then just move you on to the next one. Right?
Yeah, that's. I think that's the way to go. Because then your AI, your nav mesh setup can still use that link as a shortcut and know that that's a way to go up.
Let's say there's stairs or the lift. Is there a way to tell the off mesh link this is value 5 seconds, let's say, and the stairs is 8 seconds, therefore take the lift?
You do it in layers, right? So what you do is it's not just one nav mesh. That's nav mesh layers, and so you can make layers that have weights, and those weights are sort of more or less favorable. A more sort of common example of this is you might mark a low river, as being walkable, but it's slow, and so therefore you'd mark it as a terrain type. Now you don't do it in the nav mesh system; you just mark it as preferable or not preferable, and then if it does walk in the preferable or unpreferable terrain, you could then subscribe to those events, change it, and then do different things, right? But you can have as many different like labeled layers of types of stuff as you like, you know.
Yeah, you just give it like a weight, right? I forget what the name of the field, like of how slow you move in it, essentially. It's like just a multiplier. But yeah, I think that's probably what I would go with. Yeah, sounds like story would do the same. So it's probably the right answer. Cool. And if anybody has any other questions, feel free to ask them too. So yeah, I mean, these are the main things I wanted to talk about today. I think we already hit. Did anybody got other topics you guys wanted to dive into?
No questions. It's been a while since we've just taken question after question after question after question.
Yeah, they take a couple questions. Oh, one question that came up earlier in the student Q&A was about future coursework stuff, and I told them, I may as well tell everybody else, I don't think in 2024 I'll be doing any coursework stuff at all. I'm going to do something slightly different that I'll talk about later once I have some more details on it, but I probably won't be doing anything in 24 at all. So just the multiplayer mastery course that's going on next month, and then I'll still be around. We'll still do the show and stuff, but I'm not going to be, I don't think, have time to do new coursework stuff and be doing something exciting and different that I will definitely talk about and share soon. This is the link for the course. That's I think the link for the survey for the course. If anybody wants to go check it out on multiplayer game dev stuff. Anyway, questions. Did any pop up? Any new ones? No new questions. Jason, you got some questions?
I'm just curious if anybody's checked out the whole blocktober thing yet. Now that you actually know what it is, has anybody actually gone and checked out the Twitter and had a look?
I have not. I've been a giant slacker on that. Andrew's doing it right now.
I'm just Googling. Here we go. World of Level Design. This is from 2018, though. There's an article from 2018. Blocktober, your quick start guide to.
It's basically it's a hashtag mostly on Twitter where you'll find the more modern stuff in it. But basically, yeah,
I love to see Twitter because I don't have an account.
I just in general, it's one of those topics I really enjoy talking about. So it's one of those. I want like here's the thing. I went on to the GameDev section on Twitter every day for a week during this month just to test, and I found literally one stream over the span of a week of the like most game development centric month for level design, and there was one stream over the span of the whole time doing it. So just a bit disappointing. I think it's one of those we talked before about fields of game dev that's not really that doesn't get the representation, and it's a fun topic. I just want more people to be doing stuff with it to talk about it, you know.
Yeah, I just haven't had time. I've been, trying to promote my game and then put out a couple of tutorial videos, and this is a side gig, so that pretty much ate up all my time.
Yeah, I'll check it out this weekend though. I want to dig into it because I feel like it's fun and interesting too, and it's like a nice way to relax my brain and not think about networking code for a little while. like a nice. I've been so focused on all this netcode stuff that I haven't had a chance to actually have fun. Andrew was saying he actually got to play games yesterday. I can't remember the last time I got to play games that was more than a quick match of Arena. So
I found out today that Spider-Man is coming out, so I'll be playing that all weekend. So there you go.
I can't. They need to stop making games because I don't have enough time to play them all. It's driving me nuts. Oh. Okay, let's see. Let's take a couple quick questions. Can I use netcode for game objects and host the server on Photon? No. You have to use Photon's networking stuff to host on Photon. Correct? Anybody disagree?
I have no idea.
No idea.
Okay.
I'll leave that to you.
Are you going to be busy because you're interviewing for CEO of Unity? I will apply, but I don't think that I will interview. But sure, but here I'll definitely put in my application if they want to.
I think we need to show Jason's meme. The Dave meme.
What was that?
Oh, you haven't seen it?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, we were talking about that last night. Yeah, I was telling him I was all for that. I would promote it and push it. Have Dave be CEO. I also told him it sounds like a terribly stressful job that I can't imagine wanting to do. But
no, thanks.
The idea of managing a whole bunch of people and being responsible for that much stuff seems like a nightmare, at least to me. But any exciting features in Unity coming up or thoughts on Unite? Anybody know about anything exciting coming up in Unity 2023 or 24?
Well, one small thing that's quite nice. It's in the packages, but it's under preview. I think I mentioned I use the kinematic character controller for all of my stuff. The creator of that made one called Rival, which is sort of the dots version of that, which is even more kind of performant and has extra fancy features. And there's a sample scene, and now that's also kind of coming to Unity as an actual package as opposed to a paid asset as well. It's a preview package, so it's not really available just yet. That one I'm looking forward to giving a try to. I don't think I'll use it unless it's a dots project, but it is cool to know that the same level of like high quality character controller is available there as well, with all the bells and whistles, you know.
Is the kinematic character controller for Unity that's not the dots version, is that also getting turned into a package?
That's been a package for a while, actually.
It has.
I think
hasn't it?
Is it a package or just on the asset store?
No, sorry, it's just free asset. It hasn't been made a package yet. I don't know if they plan to. That's a good point, actually. I'm not sure if that one's actually going to make it into a package, but it is a free asset at least. So there is that.
Okay. It'd be interesting. I don't think most people. I didn't realize it was free, and yeah. I mean,
that's what inspired me to make the whole level design thing, because I was like, I don't like making something that I wouldn't use myself, and so I made a few sample kits before, and you cut corners. Like you don't use, like before TextMesh Pro, you couldn't include TextMesh Pro. So making it a sample project which uses bad text is not a fun sample project, because I wouldn't actually do that. And so there's a lot of shortcuts. Same with input system. It's like I wouldn't want to build an input system where you have to handle all of your own managed stuff. But the reason I made that last one, the 3D kit, was specifically because I was like, hang on a second, for the first time, all of these are production viable. There's a good system for input. There is a good system for prototyping. There's a good character controller. All of these are like fully functional. The post-processing stack is pretty good. The URP is pretty good. There's like, you could make a game with literally just these things and it would be a perfectly fine game. So that kind of inspired me to go, yeah, okay, now that there's some free assets that are like the whole lot builds together into a nice kit, it was worth doing. And the kinematic character controller was the last one. As soon as I thought that was free, I was like, oh, well, now I have everything I need to make like a sample kit I would actually use.
Well, I'm gonna have to start using that and stuff then. I didn't realize it was free now. It'd be nice if it turns into a package too, just because then it'll feel more built in and it can be in like an example project. Like I feel like there should be a third person or a first person shooter sample project. Simple, lets you run around like as a startup project that just uses that. Something like that.
Well, what's cool is the demo project for the Rival controller is like a full-on third-person game with an animated character that runs around and climbs up on stuff and has all of the others. So they've done that for the other one, but yeah, it would be nice if they did a first-person version, for example, for the kinematic one.
Yeah, I think that would be really cool. Oh, maybe there is one.
Not that one. Ugh, no thanks.
Which one?
I have a sea of issues with that particular sample project.
I have not used it. It's HDRP only, which is I've not really used HDRP yet myself. So
let me share it real quick for everybody who has no idea what we're talking about. This FPS sample. Yeah, which one is this?
This is a little older. It's got Unity 2018 down there. So
is this the? No, this is not. It kind of looks like that original dots one, but it looks different. It looks like it's got different stuff on there. I'm gonna have to look at this. I don't know. wow, I missed this sample project. Huh. Well, I'll take a look at it. I don't know what it's using, but be interesting.
It's older, it looks like. So
yeah.
Yeah.
2018, definitely older.
Yeah.
I always forget what year it is. It's all right.
Well, my
see.
problem with that one, though, in particular, by the way, is just the fact that at the time of development, in their own words, it was using features that were unsupported. They were literally like creating, like, even at the time, these are new, unsupported, and a lot of the language around it was very telling. Things like intended as a source of inspiration, which is a fancy way of saying just don't really use any of this. And when you open it and you look at it, it was good. Like, it worked for what it needed to do, but it was so customized and sort of hacked features and like using edge case scenarios that like it's not a example you could do anything with. And so you'd open it and go, this is fine, but I can't do anything with what this is, which kind of defeats, in my opinion, the point. There's a lot of, like, the Atom demo was the same way. It's very nice, but like when you open it, you're like, I guess I can steal the God rays from it, but like the rest of the project is so hyper specific that like they're just not useful.
Yeah, I find that happens a lot in sample and tutorial projects, especially. Like, they get super opinionated too, and they end up building out like a whole architecture and workflow that confuses the hell out of people and has absolutely nothing to do with what they're actually trying to show off. It's just what they're familiar with, and I found like most sample projects I look at end up like that, where it's just like there's a whole bunch of stuff in there, nothing to do with the sample, super confusing and very difficult to work with.
You know, as an example, Jason, last night I showed earlier the click to damage on the Northstar thing, and that's a new demo that I post release because I realized, oh, people are probably going to want to add health bars because that's super common. So I was like, well, let me create a demo because that's super easy to do. So in that process, I was like, well, I need to make a quick and simple health bar. So I started doing that, and then I was talking to Weimann last night, and he was like, oh, you should make 2 videos, one showing how to make a health bar, the other how to implement it, because the reality is you can implement any health bar to Northstar. That's the video was like 80% how to create the health bar. And then I thought, I was starting to do that, and I thought, oh shoot, but I made this quick and dirty. I made this health bar opinionated to this exact situation. And if I'm going to make how to make a health bar system, well, I need to do this differently, because this health bar won't work in every other game. It will just work in this very specific situation. So I stopped what I was doing, and now this weekend I'll probably do a video how to make a very simple but modular health bar that you can extend upon, that will work in other projects, and you might have to modify it, but you can do that easily. It's intended for that. And then implementing that into the Northstar.
That is the perpetual slippery slope. Is, do I make the thing the way I would do it to prove a point? Do I make the thing the way I would do it in a real project? Do I make the thing in a way I would do it in a real project if I knew other people than myself would be maintaining or using it? Or do I make it in the way where I would expect someone who's a non-programmer to use, and therefore so every single version of these is a vastly different system?
Yep. Yeah, and it's just so much easier when you're trying to just prove a point, just to make a quick 20-minute script that does what you need it to do, and then you move on. But yeah.
But this kind of ties into this question that popped in too of how you guys like to organize your games when making them and getting things to communicate, using game objects and POCOs and all that stuff. Yeah.
What's POCO?
Plain old C# objects or CLR objects. It's basically just a class. It's a class that's not a mono behavior. Basically,
Okay.
It's just making a normal class that that's what they are. Usually for data structures or for some other stuff, for managing things, depending on how you're building your stuff. Anybody want to just dive in on this question and got some strong opinions?
Me, strong opinions.
I have no strong opinions personally.
Again, if I'm going to do a big rant, I always feel like everyone else should have to go first, so then I don't eat the time, you know.
Well, I mean, obviously, you want to try and decouple things. So I like to use either the observer pattern or the mediator pattern, and just have somebody subscribe to events they're interested in, and they can be agnostic. Everybody that's firing those events can be agnostic of how they're being consumed. And it really varies from project to project. But generally, I tend to follow that pattern. I'll try to abstract like my UI from anything that might want to know if that UI is interacted with, or if the UI is going to be reflecting changes in like a POCO or something. And I usually will either just use plain C# events, or I recently discovered Zenjek, and I've been playing around with their signal library. And I like to use that for the mediator pattern, because I can just define signals, and then anybody can fire that signal and anybody can subscribe to that signal. So that's a really great way to totally decouple things.
Yeah, I think I do a combination of various things, partly because as I learn about new things, I'm like, ooh, let me see how I can use this. And so I've got, in the project Legend of the Stones, I'm using game modules. It's an asset I built specifically to handle data. And for larger projects with like RPGs and stuff where there's just a lot of data being thrown back and forth. So there's singletons in that. There are scriptable objects. There now, I believe there's even a scriptable object singleton as well. So there's that, and then the events are key, I think, for just runtime. Anything that's on the fly, I need to know stuff, but I'm not going to be there until later. The event system with the Blackboard is key there. And then and I don't have strong opinions because I have been learning new things, and I will continue to learn new things. So as I find them, they look shiny, and sometimes I learn that they're not as shiny as I thought, or sometimes I learn, whoa, these are more shiny than I thought. So I try not to have super strong opinions on all of this, and be very flexible about willing to change and try new things of new ways of doing it.
Yeah. All right, I'll give my short answer before Story goes. A couple things. First, the number one thing that I stick with is my rule of 200, where whenever a class is over 200 lines, I just refactor it and figure out why the hell it's too big. Occasionally it'll go a little bit over, but it's my general rule. And when I split things out and separate out the code, I really prefer to do it by system, so that each specific system has its own set of classes and its own set of files, often in a folder that's just for that specific system, and trying to minimize the entanglement between the two, all of the different things. Signals is definitely one way to do it, but I feel like it's still often in the past, what I found with that is that it kind of like abstracts and hides the dependencies. The dependencies are still there. They're just kind of abstracted away into this messaging, which sometimes makes it a little bit harder to figure out what's going on as things get a lot more complex. But when it comes to like picking how I'm going to build the game out, it really depends on what the actual game is, what the scope is, and what the scene setup for it looks like as well. If it's a game or a project where it's going to be loading in a whole bunch of different scenes and it needs to be able to switch between them, and some data needs to be static and staying around, most of the time what I'll do, and this is kind of just a high level thing too, is set up a scene that does the bootstrapping and putting together of all of the other scenes that are part of my project, like a user interface scene. Maybe there's a main menu or a loading scene, my different game level scenes. Sometimes that's more than one scene for the level. It can be the gameplay part of it. It could be a particle scene that's loaded in addition. And I'll set up a script that one that puts things together and just loads up the core components, and then another script that's responsible for managing like scene and state management. And again, try to keep all of these systems separated out and minimize those giant mega classes. If you sometimes some types of games, I feel like if you're building like certain platformers and stuff, like having a giant mega class for your character controller can make sense. But for the most part, most games and most systems, trying to keep them small, separated out, and being able to very easily tell what's referencing what and where things are tied together. If I have a system and I can't just export that system out as a package, then I want to look at it and see like, what the hell is this doing? What are the dependencies on this inventory system? That what does it need from the other things? Because realistically, like, items in inventory probably shouldn't need a reference to too much unless they're firing off abilities or doing something else like that. And I like that, make sure that all these things are separated out, and I at the very least can tell you very clearly what the boundaries are, what things are referencing what and why, and not have it be all kind of a mixed up, because it gets very confusing very fast as the project goes on, especially as the project goes on in time, and you get like a year later you're wondering like, why the hell is this like this? I don't remember. Yeah. So yeah, that's my
Well,
short.
as no surprise, I've obviously I'll hit quite a lot of the same points. Let me phrase them differently, but roughly we're in agreement on a lot of the principles of that. I would say the reason this topic is very difficult to answer when it comes up is it's kind of like asking a doctor what medication they take. And if you do that, people aren't stupid. They know you're not asking because you're curious. You're asking because you want to just copy the thing I do because you assume it's the right answer. And you shouldn't just take whatever medication your doctor's taking, right? Not how that makes sense. They have their own stuff. Their own situation. But I will say there is a way to approach the problem that makes it surprisingly easier than it looks. Is just reframe it outside of programming. I think far too many programming questions get labeled as programming questions when they're not really programming questions. A good example of this is, what if we take out the word objects here and we just go with the how do you communicate with each other? Like if you said to your friend, how do you communicate? Well, does your doctor know your shoe size? Like does your postman know, the contents of your wallet? Like the difference is that we communicate all the time, every day, with varying levels of complexity. We communicate with family members. We communicate, with different systems. Our life is systems. And the question is, how do you deal with that yourself? Well, you have different channels of communication. You communicate with some people through some applications. You communicate in person through others. As for how do you distill that into rules you apply? Well, again, look at your real life. Are you going to send a letter to the person that's in the room next to you? Well, no. Why? What is this? What is the nonsensical part of that? Well, proximity. For the most part, you're right beside them. You have all of the information you need to complete that transaction, and any additional cruft is complicated mess that's not needed. So in code, if two things are really close to each other conceptually, you don't need any extra cruft to communicate. If you want two things to be separate, in other words, someone could move into a different house next door, you don't want to make a decision about how you run your house based on who happens to be your neighbor, because that decision may change. So you put a more lax rule in place where you have some relationship that's separate. And that's kind of what event systems are. So each system, you can kind of analogously have it connect to some other part of life. If you're trying to organize an event between any number of people, you don't know how many people, well, you probably want to have some group connection that you can all work with, that you can see the outcome, but let other people connect to. And you basically invented a notice board. You have a system whereby you can distribute the information that you want, other people can see it, and then ideally have some kind of sign up page where they can send their information to you. So having some kind of system like that makes sense when there are lots of different distributed things. And what's the strength of that? Well, you can have people you don't know personally join that group, right? And so that's the thing. Each one of these systems serves a purpose. It's either, do I not know how many people will subscribe? Therefore, it should be very open-ended. Am I talking to a person? In which case, do I need to have a message back? So in the case of, again, talking to a person beside me, I'll just have a conversation. But maybe I'm talking to somebody that isn't in the same room as me, but it is personal information. Like I sent a letter to my doctor and I want a letter back. That's a one-to-one connection. So that's called a callback. And so there are different things for different things, right? I would use callback functions or tasks when I'm sending a letter to somebody and want the information directly back from that request. I would use an event bus of some kind if I'm connecting to my neighborhood or my varying systems nearby. If I'm dealing with something at a larger scale, like a city or a town, I would want an entire mediating object like a bank. So I don't have to deal with money as a concept globally. I deal with my bank and my bank deals with countries, and then I deal with the bank when I get there. So each thing is just a system you put together. If you want to get really clinical into my specific choices, I would say the things I've taken from some systems would be, I love a single entry point. Life is much more straightforward in any game or application if you can say, starts here. This line of code gets ran first, and I could walk my way down to the system. The downside with using Unity as a system in general is it has a whole lot of magic done for you, where it's very hard to discern that exact point, because all of the awakes get called and all of the starts get called, and then you're kind of going through the stuff. So there is a function in Unity that allows you to say, to run a line of code before the scene loads, after the scene loads, and I use that as my starting point. So I
The
literally make
runtime initialize on load
initialize on
attribute.
load. Exactly, yeah. So I make a static function, runtime initialize on load, and then to Jason's point, well, now I want some kind of manager. There is a world, like I like to literally call it world, or some people call it game manager. It doesn't really matter. It depends on the concept. But there is something. There is going to be some global place where you have to communicate with everything else. It doesn't have to connect to every system, but it just have to be there. And so I make this world object of some kind. I make it a resource, and then in that starting code, I create, instantiate a world, and I drop it into the project. The benefit of that is I can mark it as don't destroy and load. And now, no matter what scene I open, the game starts, the world starts, the world is created. And at which case I now have the first line of the world beginning. And now we go through the different phases. What about each scene? Each scene has its own world. And then that world can talk to the global world. But these two things are really far away. There's like the world of my life, and then there's the world of the universe. Well, how do those two things talk? Well, as per our previous discussion, they're not my neighbor. There's not multiple ones of them. So what communication pattern might work best? Well, mentioned earlier, signal pattern. The signal pattern is a way of distributing an event outwards. You don't know who's listening, but you also don't directly couple to the object. So that pattern matches the requirements I have. Then internally, I would have a load of objects subscribe to and manage its own world. And then if I want to talk to the global world, I could have every individual system know about the global world, but is that too much information? Do you need to have every single person know about the complexities of the entire world? Probably not. So I have those things talk to the local world, and the local world talks to the global world when it needs to update information. And so that's kind of the general practice. I distribute information down so that an individual system does what it needs to. It talks back and forth between its friends in as like tightly coupled way possible. Then when the system has information that feeds out of the system, it goes somewhere else. The one slight complexity I will add to that is two things I like to do is one is just an event bus, which we kind of talked about before. And as Andrew alluded to, scriptable object version. I don't make it a singleton per se, but I do have an object, which is literally like world data stuff, interesting parts about the world. What state is the game in? Is it paused or not? Is the player allowed to do input? Not everything may need to know this, but it's the kind of stuff that, let's be real, could be useful to almost anybody creating any element or UI or component. And so I put it all there, and I just have stuff right to it and from it. And then I have an event on it that can be subscribed to. So if I randomly want a pop-up that shows up whenever you're not allowed to control the input and has a little cross through it, I can just make an icon that listens to the object, subscribe to, data change, listens for if can, and then changes icon. So if I do want to have a granular piece of information, I can, but it now doesn't have to deal with all the other systems. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with something that initializes the project, something that initializes the game world. Game world is agnostic across all scenes. Then each scene has a context of some kind, some object that represents the state of the present sequence of things I'm working in. And then different systems are connected in there. There's global systems like save systems, which are part of the manager. There's local systems that might be the current waypoints or spawn points for the area or region I'm in. And then you just communicate back and forth as and when needed using the patterns at your disposal, which are event buses and callback functions and whatever. So the more you know about the individual event types and how you use them, it's less a question of what's my overall architecture, it's what problem am I solving. There needs to be some way to start the game. There needs to be something that stores the world. There needs to be something that stores the current state of the game. There needs to be a service which handles saving. Who needs to know about what? The answer is the least amount possible, and then you stitch it all together. So principally, it's basically what Jason said. It's just I have specific rules in mind for how I approach it, and it's mirrored on human communication. I try to treat it like you would your real life, because that's what systems are.
No, it sounds very similar with a couple minor differences that I think are just probably more preference things. Like instead of spawning your world object, you tend to use a scene that just has a couple objects, and I'll just load that scene additively, and then that and again same effect.
I will. Yeah, the only difference is I will do that if it's a networked game, because networked games have lobbies, and you often want to kick people if they're not logged into the lobby scene to perform the entire lobby sequence. But if it's a managerial object like a entitlement checks and checking for the save files that might be on the system, all of that stuff will be through a global manager. So I won't write that off. Sometimes I will do what you're saying, but it depends on which kind of thing it is.
Yeah, I just tend to I only do that because I found that when I tried to do it all on one object, I ended up making objects that were just felt a little too big. And then if I just made a scene, I could just put in the different objects, and it made it a little bit easier for me to manage than a single object. Not much. Like I said, it's very similar. And then the only other difference. Go ahead.
Just one trick on the multiple object thing. So this is something I stole from someone else, because I was doing this the way I said for ages, and I had the same problem. I'm like, now I have a game manager where I've got like 30 services under it, because it feels like they're all global and it feels a bit icky. I don't really like that. Mm-hmm. And so the solution I saw someone else do and I quite liked was you have a different scriptable object called services, and then you create prefabs for the services you need. You configure them in the project and you drag them into that scriptable object as like a loadout of services.
Like a service locator, basically, through a scriptable object.
And then you have that referenced in the manager. And so what the manager does is when it initializes, it only initializes the children it needs, and then maybe even lazy load stuff or whatever. So now you've got that, but you don't have to make a super object where you open a prefab and it's got 500 services. You just have a single set of prefabs that represent the like loadouts you want for certain configurations.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too. Yeah, I think any of those work. You just want to be able to adjust that and have it kind of load. One of the core things I think you want to be able to do is be able to quickly get into whatever level you have. So if you've set it up with like this, and you can just load in whatever scene you want, press play, and if you've done it right, it'll just load up. The game will start in that scene and start playing without you having to go through menus, go through and drag out multiple scenes and do all kinds of weird hacky stuff. You want to be able to get in and iterate really quick. And
I'd even go one step further and say another benefit, something I've really loved since I started doing that sort of managerial object process, is you can create a terminal or command manager on that. And then there's a set of commands that can always be ran. Like you might just have quit, pause time, load a scene, just the basic stuff. But what's cool about that is because it's a manager object on root, when you load into a scene, if the scene has vehicles, you could just have the vehicle manager register itself with the command system. And so while active in that scene, you can now load and register different vehicle changes. And so you've got this really cool way where regardless of the fact that you've got a scene with some objects or more complexity, you now have a way of controlling the entire game conceptually through a single command thing with all of the benefits that includes: undo, redo, variable changes. And that gives you a lot of power for debugging.
That's fine. That's literally what I do in the multiplayer core stuff. It's just through a shortcut manager that essentially does the same thing. There's an option for console, but I found it was easiest to just do buttons that pop up and enable and disable based on the things in there. It's really simple. This is another one of those things that's in that. No, I lied. This is not in the Bootstrap, but it's in the UI that gets loaded automatically by the Bootstrapper, which is a separate scene. It loads up that UI, and then you've got a shortcut manager. Things can register and deregister for it as different scenes load, and then there's a couple global ones for the simple things, starting a host real quick without having to go into Inspector and all that stuff. Just kind of shortcut and cheat through things.
I used to write my own for a very long time, but then I saw Quantum Console, and it does everything mine would need to do. It has a couple of choices I don't like, but again, the beauty is the code's there. So I just, quite frankly, opened the code and gutted out some of the features I didn't want and renamed some of the labels and changed some of the colors. But 80% of it's the same. And what's really nice about Quantum Console is it's attribute-based. So you can just basically take any existing class and put an attribute over it, just like serialized field, and it registers it as a new command in your dropdown. So it's very, very easy for you to build a suite of these sort of really quick test objects. The example I used in particular is I had a function that teleport to a different level. So you can literally basically say, go space 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it would go to the appropriate level. Or go hub, home, whatever, and it would go to the appropriate map. But the second parameter of that was a warp point. And so the warp points weren't global, but the object in the scene itself had a parent object with a list of waypoints. And then on load of scene, all those waypoints would register themselves. And so whatever scene is active, 0 is waypoint manager 0. So that way you could basically say home space 0 to go to the first position at home, or home space 7 to go to the 7 teleport point in the home level, or likewise anything else. And so all of a sudden it made it really nice, completely agnostic. I could make a brand new empty map, drop 5 game objects down, place it under a teleport manager, and I'd be able to go to that map space 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and just teleport around the map really quickly. And I would use the rotation of the transform for the facing direction too. So if I wanted to test stuff, it is very fast. And then of course you could use like preprocessor defines to have certain teleport points that only show up in debug builds. So you can literally teleport to the item room where you have all those objects, so you don't have to leave them littered in the game. Like, there's a million ways to do this, but the point is there, right? Having some kind of terminal that lets you manage stuff at like a macro level gives you a lot of flexibility.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can't think of a big game I've worked on that didn't have a dev console that popped up. I feel like ever since old school Doom and Quake, like, you know, when the first console appeared, everybody was like, "Oh yeah, we should all have this," because it just makes so much sense, and it's so easy to add in too, especially with the assets. What was the one that you said you were using?
Quantum
Quantum
console.
Console.
Yeah, Code Monkey did a video on it. Well, he uses it a lot in his tutorials. So.
Yeah,
Well, I need to jump off. Got to go work my day
All right.
job. So thanks
good
again for
having you,
having me
Greg.
on, everyone.
Let's see you next week. Go check out Highland Panic, everybody. There's a link in the description. All right, I gotta get going in just a second too, but if you guys want to take this one quick question
Sure.
before we do, I mean, it's kind of related, and I feel like it's
Yeah, it's pretty much on point. I mean, the short answer is it shouldn't, right? Because that goes back to if UI is your postman and XP is your doctor, like, you know, they don't really need to know about each other. They need to do their jobs, and the mediator is you that handles stuff. So the short answer is character controller shouldn't really know about UI. It should do things. Data gets generated when it does stuff. And then maybe there's either events or some kind of object that represents the data or something that fires events, and then the UI listens to those events and changes. That gives you infinite flexibility in what you're doing.
at the start too. I mean, you can just start with polling it, like, until there's enough data that it actually matters and you're getting a performance hit. Just pull the data from the character controller and the UI, and then once that gets to a point where you actually want to improve performance, switch over to some sort of eventing system. And then if you do it a little bit later too, you'll have a much better idea of what data needs to get there and how you might need to set up that event system. And it's not difficult at all to go from like hey, you know, update this text every frame to only update this text when it's actually changed type setup.
And I'm sure what Andrew will say is, like, regarding stats, like, stats are stats. They're not character stats. They're not UI stats. They're not player stats. You can have a stat system. And you do have a stat system. That's the point. They're a separate entity, right?
So when I think character controller, of course, I think of a input character controller. I move my character around, but it sounds like in this context, it's more of like, hey, here's my character class, and handling all that stuff. So in that world, it's almost like, you've got numbers that are the things like stats. XP is a stat, so merge those together. And movement, you know, in a lot of games, movement is just movement, and in the basic value, you've got the movement up, down, left, right, whatever. And but I can imagine a world where, you know, your speed, it changes your speed. So there's a stat that is a number of movement speed, and so the system that handles the movement only needs to worry about what it needs to worry about. So in that world, you have some sort of messaging system, or if in some games maybe just a simple singleton pattern of here's my stats and I only have 5 of them. That's all that exists in the game. So I just do this, and the movement speed goes up and down. So now my movement controller, the thing that's handling the movement, knows only the one thing it needs to know about and nothing else.
In that case, I would set it up too with the movement controller or the character movement controller, whatever it's called, having just a reference to the stats. It can read all the stats. It'll probably just read a move speed stat, but there may be some scenario where suddenly my character cares about strength or some other stat for movement too. So just give it a reference, or, you know, read only access to the stats, that it can read them and do whatever. Maybe it even needs write access. Maybe the movement system modifies it, but it'd start with just giving it read access to those stats. And then same with the UI. Give the UI controller read-only access to the stats of your current character. You can do that when the character spawns. Say, hey, find the UI controller, bind up to this character, just pass in a reference to the character or the stats, and then have that UI controller, like I said at the start, just do a simple update and update the values to everything you want, and then figure out how you want to send the actual dirty messaging. It can be a dirty flag, it can be an event system, it can be whatever you want to send those later. But first, just separate them out.
Yeah, I will say the only thing I want to do, if for a bit more, because I always like to give these are general advice to look into answers, and then some people always go, yeah, but what do you use? So I always say, fine. If you want the actual answer to how I solve a particular problem, the technical answer for the UI specifically, I stole my solution from Devoid Tools. Devoid Tools has a UI framework, and it's really nice. And so what basically the idea is, you based on how canvases work, and canvases refresh everything on the canvas, you create a master canvas. And underneath that, you put the different layers of your application. You would have a layer for HUD, a layer for any kind of pop-ups above that, a layer for windows and dialogues, a layer for tutorial stuff, and then a layer for whatever your fader or overlays or title screens or whatever are. Then all of that's under your manager, and then your manager has a window manager. And window manager basically lets you say push and pop. For anybody who don't know, it's a window stack system, because windows effectively are objects that stack onto the top, and the top object takes all the input. So by doing that, you can basically say push this UI component onto the screen, and whatever's on the highest level that requires input takes input, and it saves the complexity of having to deal with any turning on and off or whatever. And then you just do that for all of your systems. And what's really nice then is if you have things like HUD elements that might change, like the UI is different inside of a tank versus on the player, you basically add or you push a widget or a component or a module or whatever you want to call it to the screen, and you say push a health bar with this particular object to the screen, and then it binds to the screen, and you now have a component, and something else manages drawing that and whatever into. That's not your concern, but now you have a component that's bound to the data set of whatever object you sent it. And if you wanted to go even more broad, you could have things like Andrew's compass system, where rather than pushing a data object itself, you could push a compass. Compass subscribes to the event system of world entities, and then you can write entries to the world entities collection of who is or isn't available, and then by proxy the widget for the compass shows up, which gives you then the flexibility of either hiding or showing any particular HUD element and having UI elements above or below it, but everything is decoupled, right? So there's no like mess between it. So long story short, for UI is a system. Make it a system, give it stuff that you can push or pull or show or hide or turn off or animate or whatever, and then make prefabs that do that, and then have that handle itself as a separate problem.
Yeah.
I was muted, but I think that sounds exactly right. What was the name of that UI framework again?
Devoid, DEVOID. I think the documentation's actually down because it was it's on GitHub, so you can just find it. It's a really cool asset. And actually, to that point, it's got a signal library built in as well, so you don't have to use the signals as part of Zenject. Zenject is a much loftier system, so I wouldn't recommend starting there. But if you are just getting into this kind of architecture, there is literally a script, a single file signal solution, which is really nice. And also, it does that whole framework of layers of stuff. It will be jarring. If you're not familiar with layers of architecture, I admit you're going to look at it and go, this is scary. There's like multiple abstract concepts of various stuff. It might be a bit much to jump into, but just try to take the principles of what it does. Try to take the concepts of separate your layers out into problems. And if you want to find the full write-up, there's an entire blog article that outlines every decision. You'll have to find that in the Wayback Machine because that's long gone. But it's there. It's available.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check that one out. I don't think I've used that one before, but
let me get a link just so people can actually find it.
Cool. And then Andrew sent me a link to his game modules that I think I have a little thing in here to pop up because that kind of deals with stats. And before we go into that real quick, I wanted to pop up. There was a follow-up questions about stats. I just want to take it and then we'll maybe wrap up after that and let the baby climb on me. So the question was, so should there be specifically a script about a stat or for stats? And the answer to that is yes. But then the follow-up part was that obviously that shouldn't be a scriptable object then, if so. And I just wanted to point out that I think that you probably do want to have like a scriptable object for stat, but not for your character stats, so that you can create multiple stat scriptable objects that have a minimum and maximum value and a name and stuff, and then have those be used by your character stats class that actually has all the instances of them with their current values. And then you can create and modify stats without having to change your code. Go in and do something like that. So a scriptable object, or you can build out a custom editor setup and serialize it yourself. But scriptable object's pretty simple. Or, of course, the game module system does something very similar, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the way I would say. If your game is a simple game, if you've got 5 stats in your game and that's it, and stats just being numbers, they're just numbers. You know, you can call them numbers more precisely. Then you probably can just do anything. Like if it's a single player game, it's always going to reset. A scriptable object would be perfectly fine. If you need stats that are named, that have a min max, then okay, now you make an object for each stat and then handle it that way. If you got a system where you're like, okay, I'm making a large scale RPG, there's 40 different stats, there's items that modify those, there's conditions that modify those. I'm probably going to add more stats later because let's be honest, later I'm going to have some cool idea from a new game comes out and I want to put that in there. So I'm going to modify it. Then you need a whole system at that point because your life is going to get very complicated very fast when you start adding things and trying to spaghetti code them all together. So that's where I create game modules specifically for my game, because I am going to do exactly what I just said. I'm going to add and delete things later. I'm going to modify things later. And so the game modules is basically, it's very, very core, is a number management system with the core being the stats. You've got stats.
Well, I don't need to course correct you on your own asset, but I think it's more than that. Like, honestly, like the thing is, like a stat system could literally be a single object which has a string label and a float number in an array. And you can literally, that is your entire stat system. It's a slow way to search, but it would functionally work for 99.9% of your use cases. And it could technically grow indefinitely. The problem is it's not very scalable for multiple reasons, but that's not really the benefit. And even to your point, yes, you've got a number manager system, but even that, you could make a number manager around an array. That's not really a thing. The thing that yours does, that is the reason why you'd want a stat system, is it's a rule engine. Because the part that your stat system does that like makes it valuable for that isn't that there are stats, isn't that you're managing the values of stats, it's that you're managing the consequences of a stat affecting another stat, the timers, the values, the multiple, a stat that's a composite, a stat that's combined for other things, a stat that has a negative contact in the other one, stats that affect levels, and there's stats that are like experience, which have multiple rates of change of that kind of stuff. Each of these is a rule, for lack of a better word. There's a whole business rule conversation I could go down, which is we don't have time for. But the point is that like what makes this kind of system valuable isn't the numbers. It's not the system portion. It's the fact that a system that's sufficiently complicated needs rules, and those rules are really hard to define unless you're manually writing out, if the scenario where the experience gets over this level, increase the experience, but make sure next time round the experience increment amount has changed so that it goes less than this. Like all of these rules are what you're basically saying, and that's a very complicated thing to like, one, reason about, and two, write out. If you've got a nice tool that will automate this process and say, every time I level up the next time around, it will correctly like scale that leveling, that's a rule as opposed to just a number, right? That's what you're kind of paying for lack of a better word.
Yeah. Very, very well done. So it is more complicated than just a stats management system. There's a lot more. There's a save and load system. There's the Blackboard. There's a lot of stuff in there. There's a timekeeping system. There's a lot there, but the root of it, and it started actually with stats. That was the very first thing I did with it was, all right, I need stats. And I know I'm going to have all these other things that affect them. And I don't want to worry about doing the math on that. I want it to be automatic. And so in the system, if you've got a large scale system, everything's automated. Almost every, there's like 5% of them that is not, it's semi-automated. But everything else is automated to the point where somebody, you just say, add an item, add this weapon or whatever the item is to my inventory or to my equipment inventory. And all of a sudden, all the stats cascade down and recompute themselves. There's a Blackboard. So like we said, when you want to know that something happened, the Blackboard, you subscribe to it. So you can say player stat change. Oh, is it the strength stat? Boom. Now I got to 100. Oh, boom. Now I'm going to do some UI thing or whatever it might be, So there's all that. But if you're doing a simple game, it's overkill.
Yeah.
Let's be clear. You don't need this for a very simple game. You don't need this for Snake or Flappy Bird. But if you're doing,
if you want 100 stats on your Flappy Bird, though,
if you do need 100 stats on Flappy Bird, then yeah, the game mode is the way to go.
Got Flappy stats.
Flappy
Statty Bird.
Statty Bird, wasn't that 9%?
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I got to get going. I think everybody else probably does pretty soon too. And I had a lot of fun though. So thank you both for coming out, and thank you everybody for coming to join us live. Please hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, drop a comment, let us know what you thought, and go check out the game modules, the courses, and all the other stuff.
I should probably post my 3D kit again one more time while we're talking.
You should.
I always forget to market because I don't really do much towards marketing. So there you go. There's a thing.
Did I make an image for that too? Look, I'm gonna drop it into chat right now. Yeah, and screen share it. You can tell everybody what it is again real quick.
Yeah, so we talked about starting projects and stuff, and the biggest pain, in my opinion, is you have an idea, you want to jump in and make some levels or something, and the amount of work required to get started is like a lot. So the up until now, there hasn't really been a good way to do that, and a lot of assets became free in the last few years. And so, long story short, this is an empty environment where you can press play, and I've set up the input, the lighting, the character controller. You can move around, you can look at stuff, you can engage, you can jump, and I've got a couple of other branch stuff for like inputs for doors and trigger boxes and whatever. It's not a full game or anything, but it should give you enough to work with in terms of if your goal is to test some theories or work on stuff. And so yeah, it's basically, it was for me to test some level design theories where I could just pull down a project, press play, make some changes.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely cool. I mean, it's the kind of thing that should be like a starting scene and like an example project in Unity. You just do like a project template.
It is nice, like even for myself, like having things like default stair sizes and stuff kind of gives you a good sense of how things feel. And then one thing I added for myself is I realized I was going to do a whole thing on post-processing because I'm using the post-processing stack to like make it look a bit nicer. And then I thought that's actually a very complicated topic because it's not actually about post-processing, it's about color theory. And so if you look at the very bottom, I added a new video which demonstrates I just grabbed a bunch of LUT packs, and a LUT is basically a pre-baked set of colors and whatever. And so this is like, there's now a button you can press Q and E and it'll just change between the various thematic styles, which should give you a sense if you want to like play with how to make your game look. Is it in a desert? Does it look sandy? Does it look dreamlike and sort of a Mario game, or is it sort of bleak and whatever? So again, these are just like little niceties that should hopefully help you prototype an idea, you know?
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I like that a lot. Just seeing the different views, and then kind of, I like that you've called them out, gave them the names too, so people can see and like understand. Yeah, that is very cool. Yeah, neat. So, how do people get access to that? They go to this Ko-fi page.
Yeah, well, you can get that for free on my GitHub, but the Ko-fi page at the bottom will also let you, if you'd like to donate a small amount, you can jump into my Discord and chat and meet everybody else there. So.
Yeah, definitely worth it if you're not in there yet. There's the link in chat for everybody. All right, guys. Well, thanks again for coming out. And again, thank you everybody for joining us live. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and all that stuff. And we will be back next Friday.
Cool.
All right, bye, everybody. Oh, there's my hand. Bye.